In this video, we'll address the topic of logical subordination in Genexus. To do so, we'll focus on a KB where we're developing an application for Casino, which, among other things, allows registering the purchase orders of game slots from its suppliers. We'll use the slot type transaction to register the types of game slots, the supplier transaction to register the suppliers and the slots they offer, and finally, the transaction we're going to focus on for this case study, purchase order, to register the purchase orders for certain types of slots that the casino places with one of its suppliers. When entering a purchase order, it must be checked in the purchase order transaction that the type of slot being entered in the lines is provided by the supplier of the order, first level attribute. Is this ensured by the design? The answer to the question is no. With this design, this check will not be made. Let's see why. We'll start with a simpler case to see the difference. Between the first level of purchase order and the first level of supplier, there's a subordination relationship. In other words, supplier ID will be a foreign key in the purchase order table, pointing to the supplier table, which has supplier ID as its primary key. For this reason, an index will be automatically created in supplier by primary key, and an index in purchase order by foreign key. These indexes will be used to make uniqueness and referential integrity controls efficiently. That is to say, the index by primary key in supplier will be used to control that when inserting a supplier, there's no other with the same value of supplier ID, and that when an order for a supplier is inserted, it exists. The index by foreign key in purchase order will be used to control that when deleting a supplier, there's no order referencing it. Since there's a physical subordination between supplier and purchase order, these checks are performed. Now, what happens when we enter a slot type in the purchase order transaction? Let's look at the relationship between the tables. When a record is entered in the purchase order slot type table, we want to check in the supplier slot type table whether there's a record with the supplier ID value corresponding to purchase order ID, and with the value of slot type ID corresponding to the slot type ID of the record being inserted, since that information is stored in memory. That is to say, when trying to insert a new slot type ID in the grid of the purchase order transaction, you have the slot type ID value that the user has just entered or selected, using the selection list, and also the supplier ID value specified by the user on the first level of the transaction. Since these two attributes together constitute the primary key of the supplier slot type table, then there's an index in the table by primary key that would allow the integrity check to be made efficiently. But, will it be done? The answer is no. Note that the difference with the simple case we saw at the beginning is that actually, supplier ID, slot type ID is not a foreign key in purchase order because the two attributes are not in the same table. However, we could say that they form a logical foreign key, even though they don't exist for relational databases. The problem is that Genexus performs referential integrity checks if it understands that there's a physical subordination relationship between the tables. Therefore, it will not make them in this case, allowing you to enter a type of slot that's not provided by the order supplier. Let's see this in the following example. The supplier with identifier 1, named International Game Technology, provides only the slots with identifiers 3 and 4, virtual reality slot and 3D slot respectively. However, in the purchase order, we indicate that we will buy from that supplier the slots of type 1 and 2, precisely the ones they do not provide. How can we solve this problem? The first thing we can think of is to invoke a procedure in the purchase order transaction rules that performs the check. And in case of returning false, show the following error. We would have achieved the same effect in another way, without writing anything, if in the supplier transaction there had been a secondary attribute, or on the second level, so as to infer it in purchase order, and force Genexus to notice the relationship. A no matching error will be displayed if the type of slot that's being entered in the lines is not provided by the supplier in the order. We could use the ref message rule, which is used to customize the error message when a referential integrity check is made on insert or update from a foreign key, and if it fails. This rule has as parameters, in addition to the message that we want to be displayed in case the RI check fails, the attributes that make up the foreign key. An interesting question is what will happen with the solution if you want to delete a slot type from a supplier for which orders already exist. That is to say, if the user, through the supplier transaction, tries to delete a line for which there's a purchase order with that supplier and slot type. In this case, Genexus will not be able to make a referential integrity check because there's no index by supplier ID, slot type ID, in the purchase order slot type table. Since that foreign key only exists at a logical level in the extended table, there will be no index at all, given that an index corresponds to a physical concept. Therefore, this check will have to be programmed in the rules of the supplier transaction, invoking a procedure to do it, and then triggering an error according to the result returned.